This game is another good example of Botvinnik handling well the merits pawn structure, with the space advantage in the center. Here black has a choice to make. He can either put the bishop on e7 after playing e6, and that would lead more to the hedgehog style pawn structure, or he can play g6 as he did in the game, and this would be more of a meritsy pawn structure. Years after the game was played, white started to play queen takes on d4 more often, keeping more pieces on the board. But when the game was played, it was considered that white should not avoid simplifications and just take on d4 with the knight, which is also more natural. The black queen got transferred to b7 so that black can possibly try to play rook d8 and maybe d5. But unfortunately in this position it's already too late to prepare d5, because white has established a very strong bind on the center. And he's probably going to be better because of that throughout the rest of the game. After all, the space advantage is quite significant. Since tactically playing e6 and d5 doesn't quite work, black begins to prepare the breakthrough on the queen side with pawn to b5. Black was worried that white might take on f6 and then play knight to d5, and he wanted to defend the pawn on e7 with the queen first. And that's why he delayed the advance of the pawn to b5. But in the game, this doesn't turn out any better, because now white just prevents b5, and black doesn't really get a good chance to play that. And without b5, black just remains in the cramped position, and he's still going to be worse. Move, because now pawn to b5 is just going to lose a pawn for black. With this one, white attacks the pawn on b6, and black has a choice to either guard the pawn or to advance it to b5. It had to be played because otherwise, if black played pawn b6 to b5, I would take with the c pawn and then play pawn to a5, getting a passed a pawn. So again, black has to keep his position pretty passive and keep defending the pawns. With the exchange of the dark squared bishops, the pressure on b6 has been somewhat reduced, and this seems like that the exchange of bishops is to black's advantage, because he's the side with less space. But there's another aspect of the exchange of dark squared bishops, and that is that the black king now is going to be slightly weakened because of the weaker dark squares around it. So Botvinnik found a very good way to take advantage of that weakening of dark squares with his next move. Now black pretty much is tied up with his knight to g7, because he has to keep guarding the h5 square. If knight, say, goes to e6, then white's going to play pawn to h5 and possibly create some strong attack on the king side. If black plays pawn to h5 himself, then this is just going to be a hook for white to create the attack on the king side. So black has to keep the knight on g7 basically, and that again plays to white's advantage. So in the end, black can't bear staying in this passive position anymore, and he tries to break through on the queen side, but this just speeds up his defeat. The other option was to play knight to f6 and even concede the fact that the f pawns would be doubled, and white might have to play something else instead and just let black capture on d5 and then take with the e pawn and put pressure on the e file. So as it is in the game, though, after b5, white's advantage just increases. Now it is very important that white takes over the c file, as that is pretty much the only open file in the position, and combined with the strong central placement of white's pieces and the pass pawn on the queen side, his advantage becomes decisive pretty much. Now white could take on e7 with a check, and black would have to sacrifice the exchange, say knight takes e7, then rook takes e7. But this would be not that great for white, because then black would capture on b3, and white would still have to neutralize the passed b pawn. So instead he goes for the purely positional solution and transfers the game into an endgame where his passed pawn is going to decide the game. Again, Botvinnik goes with the simplest solution and just transfers the game into the winning knight endgame, because now the passed a pawn is the decisive factor. In addition to the positional advantage, now white also has the material advantage because he has an extra pawn. And here black resigned because he's going to, well, he can't really even stop the white a pawn from queening, because the knight is very bad at fighting with the rook pawns usually. So this game was very typical for Botvinnik's style. He won it without any sacrifices by simply purely applying the positional pressure on black's position. And he was playing on both sides of the board. He would play on the queen side where he had the passed pawn, but he also made important moves like h4, which, you know, would at some point threaten to transfer the game to the king side. And this just goes to show that if you have central control, you can choose which side of the board you want to play. And black just had to go down very passively in this position because he could never find a good counterplay. And when he did try to free up himself with b5, that just resulted in white taking over the c file and winning the game pretty quickly after that.